This podcast is sponsored by A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family-owned and operated. By Hyde Park Care Pharmacy. Experience the difference an independent pharmacy can make for you and your loved ones. Hyde Park Care Pharmacy offers personalized care, short wait time, very competitive pricing, easy transfer of your prescription, and much more. And by Molly Maid. During these times of COVID-19, it has never been more important to keep your family safe. With the Healthy Home Cleaning System, Molly Maid London is here to help. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. Today, we welcome back to the podcast John Marsh. Longtime friend to Kevin, John is a recently retired priest living in Vancouver, British Columbia. He has recently published 3 new books, Ain't Nothing But a Mess, Impossible People, and On Edge. We discuss his books, his retirement, and the possibilities of God presented in community.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you may be listening. We welcome you back to another edition of the Vicar's Crossing podcast. The Vicar's Crossing is a virtual space where faith intersects with the public square. And we are thrilled that you're back with us. And my name is Rob Henderson, and I am the rector at Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Anglican Church in London.
Fine fella.
Vicar one.
Vicar 1, Vicar 2 here. Revy Kevin George, St. Aidan's Anglican Church, South or Northwest London, Ontario. I'm not in the Southwest. I'm in the Northwest.
My name
you
is
could
Ian.
be anywhere right now.
Well,
I could be.
Well, we're online, really, if you think about it.
Yeah. True.
Yeah. I'm Ian. I'm a producer, singer-songwriter, creative guy.
He's a man.
He's a man.
Yeah.
Like we had, you know how you had Elton John, the piano man?
Yep.
You got Ian, the guitar man.
Guitar man.
That was Bread. That was David Gates and Bread sang the guitar man. We got to get you another. He can't be the piano man. That's Billy Joel.
No,
Right.
Can't
He's
be
our
piano man.
digital deacon. We'll just stick with that.
We love the digital deacon, baby.
All right. And today, guys, we will be joined for the second time in the Vicar's Crossing, a return visit by our good friend John Marsh, who's out in BC, and he'll be joining us shortly to talk about his books. He's been busy writing with a few books, Ain't Nothing But a Mess, Impossible People, and his book called On the Edge. So we'll chat about some of the things that he's been writing about and a bit more with John coming up.
Fantastic. In the meantime, we're glad that you're all here with us today. And we want to begin by acknowledging that this podcast is recorded on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Attawandaron peoples on the lands connected with the London Township and Sombre Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. This land continues to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples whom we offer our respect to, both Métis, Inuit, First Nations, and we recognize them as contemporary stewards of this land and vital contributors of our society. And we join our efforts with them towards a more just society and reconciliation between all peoples.
All right. And guys, where would we be without our wonderful sponsors?
Where
you know
indeed?
We'd be? We'd still be cramped in Kevin's office.
That's right.
Not being able to reach the people that we've been able to reach the last
That's
year
right.
or so through this format here. But our sponsors help make all that possible. So hello and thank you to A. Millard George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated. And our thanks again to Dave Mullen and the staff at A. Millard George.
Well, guys, I'm excited to say that one of our other sponsors, Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, is about to welcome another human being into the world any moment.
Woo, any moment.
Any moment.
We might have breaking news today.
This could be breaking news, but our friend Carol Basada, owner, pharmacist at Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, is expecting her child very, very, very,
very, very soon.
Very soon. Okay.
Wow.
So Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, we're praying for you, Carol. Locally owned, locally operated, locally loved. Walk in there, tell her to call up the big box you've been going to and snatch your prescriptions from them and start getting your service over there. You won't be disappointed. You'll be well loved and cared for. And blessings to Carol and her husband and her family as they prepare to welcome this new little one.
And last but certainly not least, if you have a little one, this might be of service for you.
Mhm.
We want to say a special thank you to Molly Maid. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London
There you go.
today. Yeah, Trisha Lister helped us out with that one, and yeah, what a big
Can I
hand.
just
Yeah.
take a moment to offer congratulations and props to Ian for that incredible segue?
That was the darn good segue. Yeah,
That
we didn't
was-
even plan that.
No, that was
Because
golden right
because what
there.
mom wants to clean? What new mom wants to clean her house?
Yeah, no, he was
Sure.
like
What
he
new
was like,
parents want to do all that?
his,
You know,
his,
he was right
his
on the ball.
brain, the synapses of his brain are like snapping, like they're just as crazy, man. Like I could
Is
never
it-
come up. He's quick.
It's not something you need to tell us, is there, Ian? You were thinking about?
Yeah, you got a baby coming or something, Ian? Or-
No.
Why would I ever?
I know, I
Just
know.
making
I
sure.
w-
We're
if-
here for you.
Have
If
you
there
have you
were-
heard how it happens, Ian?
If there has been if there was ever a circumstance where I was telling you that I was going to be having a child over the podcast, was not be the first time you would hear
Oh,
about
I
it.
see what you're saying then. Okay. I thought you were
Yeah.
saying you didn't know how it would happen. I was going to say, well,
No.
again, I don't care to have to explain it over the podcast, but if we must, we can try and explain how this whole thing happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey guys, I want to do one thing because oftentimes, you know, we get emails and Twitter shout outs and all that kind of stuff from people. We really appreciate that. Once in a while, we get a note of some things that are happening in and around our area that really do
Yes.
fit into what we're doing here at the Vicar's Crossing, where faith intersects with the public square. So just quickly, I wanted to tell everybody about a special workshop that's coming up. And this is, it's being put on in London, but because of Zoom formats and because we can go a lot farther than our cities of where we are, anybody listening to this can take part. So
Awesome.
got a note here from our friends at St. James Westminster Anglican Church in London here that they are having a Stop Human Trafficking workshop. All right. Human trafficking, of course, is something that's been in the news and something that we've been conscious of and trying to educate ourselves more and be aware more.
Right.
And so they're inviting people to take part in this. So we wanted to just mention this. If you're at all interested, it's coming up Saturday, June the 5th from 10 until noon, all online. It's free. There's no cost. And the keynote speaker will be Aura Burdett, who is chair of the London Anti-Human Trafficking Committee. So you can find out how to know more about it,
Right.
human trafficking, and most importantly, how to stop it and discover the impact of this in our communities. So
Fantastic. We'll throw a link in the description, guys. So take a look at the description on this podcast.
please do. And thanks for sending that out. And we hope people will take part in that. And become
Important
more
work.
aware.
Thank you to St.
Yeah,
James for
definitely.
doing that. Yeah.
Yep. Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, it's time for us to play a little game in the Vicar's Crossing that we like
Ooh.
to call.
It's not a lie if you believe it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's not
It-
not a
it-
lie, Kevin.
Okay.
If you believe it.
Why is that?
So-
How's that work?
Because one of us is going to tell a story, and it could be a lie, and it could be the truth.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a lie or it's the truth if the person believes it.
Right.
Either way.
Yes.
So today I'm going to tell a story, and you guys have to figure
Have
out
to
whether
decide.
it's true or not.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
so-
I'm ready.
So here's my story about myself. When I was 9 years old, as I
Okay.
told you guys, I'm originally from Ottawa. I was born in Ottawa and stayed there till I was about 11 or 12. When I was 9 years old, I spent a summer at a horse riding camp. And it was just outside of London. And it was kind of a 3-week thing. We'd stay for like Monday to Friday and come home on the weekends, stay overnight. But I learned to horse ride and did that over the course of the summer. And at the end of the year, I was awarded the blue ribbon for top equestrian in the 8 to 10-year-old category at horse riding camp. And I still have that
Whoa.
ribbon. It's in my little box of stuff that you keep, you know. when you're
Yeah.
a kid.
Okay. Yeah. Schoolyard
So-
memories.
So my story is I'm remembering that, thinking about camp this summer and how camps might be canceled, which
So
is always
you're
heartbreaking. And I
you're a
was remembering this.
regular Ian Miller then. Is that his name? Ian Miller? Was that his name? Ian. Remember the Olympian, the guy who what was his name? Anyway, he's an equestrian.
Is he an equestrian? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, he won all these gold medals.
Did he go to horse camp?
Yeah, yeah. He must, did he go to
Did
horse
he get a
camp?
blue ribbon?
Did he get a blue ribbon? Come on, Ian.
What do you think, Ian?
Dun, 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 dun,
I don't know. I'm trying to think. Like,
Yeah, it's Ian Miller. He was a big equestrian. Go ahead.
oh,
Really?
okay.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, we went to horse camp together.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm like, and this is like in Ottawa, like the horse camp.
It was just outside of, yeah, it
Just
was
outside
kind of
of Ottawa,
outside
okay.
the city. Like, remember my dad driving me out.
Yeah, I
You
believe
want to
it.
go yes?
Yeah, I think so. You know
Well,
what? Why not?
I
People-
just
sure.
I just looked up Ian Miller, who's 74, and it says that he was athlete in show jumping. He's a 2-time winner of show jumping World Cup and an Olympic silver medalist. And it says former student of equestrian school outside of London with Rob Henderson. It says
Oh,
on Wikipedia.
that's what it is. I finally found it on Wikipedia.
So I'm gonna go with yes. I'm gonna, and I think that you have that blue ribbon somewhere.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I have never ridden a horse in my life. The closest I ever got to
Nicely
a horse
done, my
was
friend.
the one at the mall where you put the quarter in.
Mm.
And so, no, I did not go to horse camp. I did not win a blue ribbon.
Wow.
And I've never been on a horse in my life. So
Well, you're
I got
convincing.
both of
So
you.
I can honestly say it's not a lie if you believe it, because
Yeah.
But
you
yeah,
tell it like you believe it.
I've been telling that story my whole life
Yeah.
to people, and they're quite impressed.
Well, now that I know you're a contemporary of Ian Miller's, I want to get your autograph.
That's right. We'll work on that. All right, guys, enough of this horse.
This is
Horsing around.
Yeah, horsing around. John is here, so
bring him
let's
in.
bring John Marsh into the Vicar's Crossing. And we are so happy to welcome back to the Vicar's Crossing our good friend, John Marsh. And John, we're glad you're here. It couldn't have been too painful the first time, or maybe you're a glutton for punishment, but we're glad you're back. How are you?
I'm doing fairly well. It's good to be back with both of you. Well, I guess now all three of you.
All three of us. Yep.
Four. Yeah, you become a trinity.
Yeah. Yeah. So John is hitting us from beautiful British Columbia, Vancouver.
Mhm.
How's everything out there, John?
Well, thankfully, so far the sun is shining. We're supposed to get a bit of rain later just to demonstrate we still are Vancouver, but it's sun is shining. It's a little bit cool, so
All
I've
right.
got my coat on, so not a bad day. I've already been out walking for a few kilometers.
Very good.
The man
Very good.
doesn't slow down.
Good. We hope you've been safe in all the madness over the last 15 months or so. Hope you and everyone have been doing okay.
Doing fine. Thank you very much.
Well, look, let's jump in. The last time we had you on the podcast, since then you've retired, as is hard to believe, after what, nearly 40 years, John, or
Yeah,
over 40
years.
40
Good.
years of ordained ministry. And I'm sure that adjusting to retirement, as people talk about it, can be difficult. But because I know you, I also know that you're an incredibly engaged individual, and we're not likely to be finding you sitting in a lawn chair next to an RV up in a park somewhere with a Maclean's magazine. I just don't see you engaged that way in retirement. We're gonna get ourselves a 40-footer and drive across the country. That doesn't strike me as your
No.
taste.
Cancel the RV.
Canceled.
That's right.
I don't see you either looking for a retirement village in Boca Raton where you can wear your pants up to your nipples and, sort of trounce around. That's not your style either, is it?
No, it reminds me of my grandfather when I was, 10 and saw him wearing his pants up to his nipples. And went, oh my God, that's a shitty look. Come on. If that's what's required, I'll shoot
That's right.
myself now.
I have to get a new belt. My nipples are chafing. If I wasn't certain of all that before, in seeing you sit down and bang out 3 books, ostensibly in your retirement, we're certainly convinced of it now. Since the fall, you've been banging out books like crazy here. Perhaps better put, I think the way you write about it, you're still attuned to the lure, to the seduction, the possibilities, the calling, if you will. And I also know that it's difficult for you in part because, for better or worse, you've been separated from a community that you've journeyed with for 20 years now. And that separation itself can bring its own grief and pain. Can you say a little bit about what it's been like, this change from sort of active parish ministry to being engaged now in a different way and exploring different opportunities? I know you're talking about a podcast with your friend Sean, but a little bit more about being engaged in different ways and the difficulties posed from not so much the retirement, I think, as the separation from community.
I think, I mean, if I was into one word answers, I'd simply say loss. It's been the experience of loss. And on the one hand, I knew that that was going to come. I knew that I would cease being engaged in active work. But what I hadn't counted on was literally the loss of the community. Um, on the one hand, I understand what's going on, but on the other hand, the church has a real difficulty understanding, and perhaps this has been earned fairly in that I'm not the guy to play power games. I have no interest in that bullshit. These are people I worked with, and I don't see myself as leading them per se. I see myself as working together with them. And I've been connected with them, in relationship with them, for good or ill, for 20 years. And then as of a certain date, the guillotine comes down and you're out the door and you're not supposed to be there. Now, I get the average maturity of most leadership in the church, which is somewhere around 5. And
You're being generous.
and hence a need to try to control things behind the scenes. But that's not who I am. So what I'm experiencing is really a form of grief. Is how do I understand my life now when I've lost the relationships that I've had these 20 past years, the people with whom I would worship and pray and sometimes play, and it's been a tough adjustment. And I'm trying to figure out how I connect and where I connect. And then the reality is that COVID has put a kind of a snafu in all of that, in that I cannot go to any place. Truth to tell, most places that I would go would probably drive me out of my mind. And
you them.
yeah, and my wife doesn't need me sitting in the pew going, I would be reacting left, right, and center. But
right,
it's been tough. But we're trying to make new connections and try to connect as best we can in different ways, and we move on from there. So
yeah, it's really hard. I hear what you're saying. I mean, like, I just think about, even for those of us who've shifted, and you've done this in the past too, John, that sort of shift from parish to parish. Like, I reminisce as I think about what you've been going through about leaving, St. Mark's by the Lake in Tecumseh after 14 years, and what it was like in those first weeks here. I wasn't here. I was mentally and sort of, spiritually, I don't mean that in any cheap way, but like in a different place. I was back there, and the grief of the loss of those relationships, as you say, for better or worse. I mean, sometimes it's the joy and the playfulness of the relationships, and sometimes the combativeness of the relationships, and everything that goes along with being church and being community. It's a complex mix. And somehow or another, I think the church, particularly as it relates to retirement, when you retire from a community after 20 years, it behooves us to be attentive to what that means for a senior cleric like yourself who's retiring. There's a lot in there.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I understand fears and concerns of retired clergy hanging around trying to maintain their hands on the strings and trying to manipulate and so on. I mean, those situations have happened over and over again. But surely to God, we can try to wrestle with the complexity of that. It's not always that way. It's not always the case that somebody is trying to, play games and so on.
Yeah.
And that there is a real loss there. But I got to be honest. One of the reasons I've been writing books since I started last April. During COVID, but it's just a certain compensatory behavior. I knew I was going to lose something. I knew I was going to lose a great deal of the interactions I've had, and I had to do something else to keep my brain engaged and not go out of my mind. So,
yeah, well, it's that sort of place, I guess, I want to go to next, because it really speaks to, and I think that that's a part of the challenge that the church in its blanket statements about, well, you know, you leave a parish or you retire from a parish, you leave and you don't go back, and so on and so on. It's a lack of, well, it's at least a disinterest in having the difficult conversations that sometimes have to go along with that. In other words, the vulnerable conversations, like, okay, well, who are the personalities involved? Who's the priest coming in? Who's the priest that's retiring? Can they talk? Can we express how we feel? Like, who get to know who one another are, and so on. I think that one of the things I really liked about the 3 books, 2 of which are right here in front of me, if I can pull them out. The other one's in the mail, and I've got it on the Kindle. Whoa, I'm not knocking stuff over. But here we've got Ain't Nothing But a Mess. And we've got Impossible People. And the third one is On Edge. Do you have that one there, John?
Good. John brought his own
those
props.
idiots who get on something and they always have their book over
There it is.
There it is. Yeah.
John's over his shoulder. Well, one of the things, yeah, you look very sexy.
Third book, yeah.
Yeah. Sexy men doing sexy business. Shout out to Mark Smith. So one of the things that strikes me about all 3 books is your willingness to be vulnerable in these books. You're quite open about your own journey, about your own walk, your own, as you express it, a haunting, your own seduction by the possibility of what God is. And it's not easy to put yourself out there. I mean, I think when you do that, there's there's that sort of, you know, you have to be protective of your own spirit in the midst of that. And so you do share a lot about yourself. In Ain't Nothing But a Mess, you write these words: as I look back, my looking back but an expression of my prayer to look forward still. That I have so lived is a surprise to me, perhaps a surprise to others. That I have done what I have done, that I was involved with what I was involved with, I remain surprised. I remain surprised not because of my lack of competency. Competency aside, I'm surprised by the unfolding of possibilities to follow my passions, my desires being unfolded within community. In following my passions, doubling down on my loves, risking my fears, honoring calls but barely heard, responding in moments with little but faith, hope, and love, I have been enabled to participate, along with others, in the work in honoring the promissory lure of the reign of God, which I have always taken seriously. The lure, the seduction, the risk of hospitality, justice, and compassion. It has been at times, for good or ill, a success or a failure, but it has always been a calling shared. Can you say more about your own sense of that lure and that seduction, looking back over those years? I mean, you write about this in the book about how it would have been unpredictable to suggest in your youth or childhood that this is where you would end up.
Yeah, because in my childhood now, members of my family, particularly my brothers, may have a different take on that, but we were hardly a family that was church-going people. That's not to say that we didn't understand ourselves as Christian, but perhaps more accurately, we understood ourselves as Anglican, because I grew up with being taught about all things bright and British at the high point of Western culture, dare I say, world culture. So it was a part of our cultural identity. It was a part of what you did. And we didn't go to church all that often. I have very few memories of church school, so I didn't get my brain polluted by ridiculous teaching and asinine expressions. But it hardly is a background that prepares you to do what I've done. And that's part of the surprise, because there was no way in hell I was ever considering doing this. And if not for the language that I use now, that I think is the language that fits it the best. It's a language that I've been using for 15 years or so, is that I was lured by something. I was haunted by something, haunted by a set of experiences that got me out of myself, that got me out of my own self-preoccupation and introduced me to things that I started to follow. And so I was shocked that I managed to do it. I am one, unlike Kevin and Rob and Ian, I don't know either one of you well enough to make the statement. So maybe you're the same as Kevin.
God help you.
Oh, God, no.
But I am not an extrovert by any description. I'm a guy who's pretty quiet and pretty comfortable with being alone, pretty comfortable with keeping to myself, keeping my mouth shut, and not engaging in things. My memory as a kid was I'd sit in a class and teachers would ask a question, I'd answer it to myself. There's no way in hell I would ever in a million years raise my hand and center myself out to give the damn answer. So that in most cases, when I found out I was right, I would just, have a smug smile to myself. So that someone who is so introverted, so, comfortable within themselves, finds themselves engaged in a series of tasks that I'm interacting with people beyond what I have ever grew up with, beyond the realities that I knew, that I'm engaged in activities that require me to be front and center, that require me to open my mouth, that require me to talk and work with a group of people to try to discern what a calling might be, what a vision might be, what a dream might be, that I'm called to stand up in front and make statements and engage in critical activities, that I'm called to work with people who are even beyond church. Like, that's all a shock to me. I don't even know how the hell I've done it. And people have, we all know that there's a certain, in a way, and I mean this in the best of possible terms, where we develop a certain character, and we are that character, and there's a way of adopting. So there is that character that I would adopt, that okay, I'm engaged in this and I'm engaged in that, and I don't mean that negatively. The problem comes is when we take the character that we adopt as far too declarative, as far too absolute, as far too prescriptive of our description. This is who we are. And it's not who we are. It is something that we're involved with. But that I've been so involved for 40 years shocks the hell out of me. And I'm going to stop talking now because I'm running out of air.
Well, I hear that, and I think of you, Rob. Like, I think you're not the extrovert that I am.
No. Everything John says resonates with me, because I would throw up when the teacher called me out. After 5 or 6 kids, they'd finally say, "Well, Rob, what do you think?" And then I'd get sick to my stomach because but in my head, I knew exactly what everything was, and I had my thoughts and ideas. But like John said, there was no way I'm going to do that. So to end up doing what I'm doing, I remember thinking back and going through discernment and saying to some of the people that I was discerning with, I've been thinking about this for a long time, and it's hovered over me. It's called a ministry. And they say, "Well, why didn't you do it?" And I'd list all the things that I thought I had to be, and said, "Well, I'm not, because I'm not that.
Right.
I don't speak. I don't, do all these types of things." So anyway, yeah. So I hear John in that quite powerfully. One thing I know, John, that I'm sure you'd love to talk about today is Diocesan Synod. So I have
one of John's favorite subjects.
That's right. But we're fresh off our synod here on just the past couple of days, our virtual synod, because we couldn't meet. But one of the things that our Bishop Todd Townsend said in his charge to synod was this. He said, "I love our church buildings, but we do not need $440 million worth of buildings for ourselves." He said, "I am asking how we can restore, repurpose our buildings as neighborhood assets. I want to see church communities thrive, not close." And I think for many, those were very hopeful words to hear this past weekend, because the church has held too closely the physical assets that have been passed on to us. And the hope in our bishop's charge this year was in his call to for all of us to risk holding people and holding relationships closely while holding the physical aspects lightly. We have been an institution, we have an incredible amount of resources that have been passed on to us, and we hold on to those very tightly. if we have the courage to risk letting go of some of those things, giving away some of those things, sharing those resources, the possibilities seem endless. And in your book, It Ain't Nothing But a Mess, you write this: perhaps God's power, God's luring, is within and around us, inviting possibilities of life, dare I say, inviting possibilities of great things, small, common, ordinary acts. Perhaps we have resources beyond belief. So I can't help but ask, what would happen to ourselves, to our churches, if we risked responding to invitations, stirrings of God? What would emerge if we believed that our generosity could be multiplied to help others?
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps our world is filled with more wonder and energy than we can imagine. So can you share a little bit more about how our generosity could be multiplied? And I mean, are you hopeful when you hear a bishop speak about turning buildings into neighborhood assets?
Well, at the risk of sounding like I'm disagreeing with myself, which I may do all the time, uh, because I never promise to be consistent. But if we enter into a reflection upon generosity and our stated goal, our purpose is to try to figure out how we can multiply that generosity, we're screwed from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot enter into generosity with an understanding of how do I make it even greater? Like, how do I multiply this?
Mm-hmm.
But what I was meaning by that was that when we open to the lure of generosity, when we begin to respond to that call to give of ourselves, to give of whatever it is we have, and to give it beyond ourselves, then curiously, perhaps surprisingly, we find that it is matched, or that other people are engaging in the same things. And sometimes, not always, there's never a guarantee, sometimes some things start to coalesce and come together. One of the examples I would have was when many years ago, when we took a guy into sanctuary, and this was a community that had really no financial resources at all, and that we would take this person into sanctuary. We had no clue how it was going to be paid for. We had no idea how things were going to happen. But it was recognized at the time that somehow we needed to respond. We needed to act. There was a space that this guy could occupy. So that was shared. We could bring together by talking amongst ourselves, get him a bed. We could do this, we can get that. We realized that we could begin to share of ourselves and our rationale as to why we were doing such an insane thing. And then, much to our surprise, the story caught on, and other people started to phone up and say, well, how can I help? How can I do this? How can I be involved? How can I offer this? And so what began to develop rather organically, and it would be foolish to say that there was a thought out plan to before any of this happened, because usually when you're thinking about the plan, the opportunity passes you by.
Right.
That's the nature of whatever is stirring within the name of God, is that unless you're trying to be attentive to it, it'll slip by you like a thief in the night. And then you begin to wonder why is nothing happening here?
Right.
But what began to happen was this organic development that continued to grow over time, involving a series of individuals, both within the church and outside the church, people I didn't even know.
Right.
It began to also involve, perhaps surprisingly, some people in the diocesan structure. That one probably shocked the hell out of me, but they got involved in whatever way they could. And so we then had this network of people, and it's best to understand it as this network, or as this live web of energy that was happening in and through and around and all over the place. And that was what sustained us for the 4.5-year fight to get this guy out.
Right.
But
Right.
all that happened in the beginning was an attempt to respond to a call of generosity.
So this is a guy, just to be clear. So this is a guy who's going to be deported, right?
Right.
And he comes into basically the church basement or whatever and lives for 4.5 years.
Essentially, yeah, we need not get up in the architectural detail of the building.
Yeah.
But he comes in. I mean, he had been working with an organization in Vancouver called VAST, which was called Victims Against Torture.
Right.
And they had been working in the Vancouver area for years. The leader of this group, the chairperson of this group, was just this ball of energy, coarse as coarse can be.
Yeah.
Chain smoking. She swore a blue streak. My God, she was like a trucker on a CB radio.
Come on back, truckers.
But my God, she was just a ball of energy.
Yeah.
And I had met her before. So she brought the person into the church. And I have no idea how or why the response was given, because we've been asked many times, not just this church, but all throughout my career, I've been asked many times to provide sanctuary. I've said yes twice.
Right. It's interesting to me because, like, I was just to go back to Rob's question there about what Todd was on about a couple of days ago. I think it fits into that wheelhouse of not, like, again, because it's not prescriptive. It's this what I heard out of the bishop, at least the other day, was this invitation to consider how we hold on to the things of life and how we hold on to the people in life and those relationships, and then engage that conversation. Because, and I think another thing he said in the midst of that is, and it just popped to mind as you were talking, John, about how if you start planning too much, the whole thing passes you by. I think he said, the culture eats strategic plans for breakfast. And which is absolutely right. And so while you're strategically planning, it's gone, that moment in time, that opportunity for the Spirit to do its work, or for you to do work with the Spirit, or use whatever language you want around that, it comes and it goes. And so, and he followed that up with these words: people. That's our strategy. People. And I quite like that.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, if you are committed to doing strategic planning at the beginning, in the middle, at the end, all the time, the opportunities will probably pass you by. But that's not to say, I'm not saying that there's some magical way forward, that if we respond, we will be led into success after success. I have one response to that: bullshit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a sense
I'm
of being.
not saying that planning is not required.
Right.
But it's like, but to put planning first is putting the cart before the horse.
Right. To me, it's been about being vulnerable enough to say, this wonderful 5-point plan is a piece of crap right now, so we're moving on.
Right.
to end up saying, yeah, you plan, you do things, but you got to be honest to look at it and say, we're not, this isn't our idol. This isn't the thing that we're going to, go to the grave with.
So the question was asked, because I want to pick up the point you were just saying. The question was asked, how do I feel about a bishop? And I know Todd, I consider Todd a friend.
Mm-hmm.
How do I feel about Todd talking in this way? Got to be honest. I feel quite good about that. I feel very good about that. I'd rather hear a bishop speaking in that kind of language than in the ways that I'm used to hearing bishops speak. That's very reassuring. It's very refreshing. I'm also incredibly suspicious.
Yeah.
I'm incredibly suspicious that this shit's actually going to happen. He's absolutely right. The agenda is responding to people. But then I have a question, but what people are you responding to?
Mm-hmm.
What people are you actually trying to listen to? Are you listening to the voices that are bubbling up on the edges? Are you listening to the voices of those who may not necessarily come to your group or organization, but are raising really critical questions? Are you listening to what's going on within your neighborhoods, and responding to that? When things get centralized and planned from the top down, they're usually, to put it bluntly, fucked up.
Yeah.
But,
Well, and I mean, I think that's what gives me hope out of this is that much of what you're saying there is the sort of language I'm hearing out of Etta Todd and others right now about where we need to be in terms of our neighborhoods, and in response to sort of the apocalyptic times that we've been living in the sense that much has been revealed to us in this last 15 months or so. And so getting engaged on conversations on the edge become increasingly, and have been, but people are becoming more aware of how important those conversations are. God knows that you, I mean, this sort of continues on this vein. God knows that you've been frustrated at times by the institutional church. As you say, you can have your skepticism about what was said, because all of us here in our own way have that same sort of cynicism, in the sense of, let's see if the proof is in the pudding. Many of us have, I think that those are, what I'm trying to say is, I think that those of us who know you well, know that you often have deep and insightful and critical thinking about the church. And some people who don't know you will take that to be a lack of respect for the institution. Now, I've known you for more than 25 years, and I know that that is just not the case. I think that you respect the institution enough that you actually want to call it to account, to a sense of really being what it can, or at least might be. In your book, Impossible People, you write this: without the institutional church, without its embodied forms and structures, Jesus, the dangerous memory of Yeshua ben Yosef, would have long been forgotten, at best relegated to the dusty archives of arcane disciplines. Consequently, you write, I am deeply thankful for ecclesial forms and structures, for its creatureliness, for its human face, despite its failures, its arrogance, its lapses in judgment. We are, with all the flaws and promise, carnal creatures. We think, we feel, plan, organize, dream, and desire for good or ill. Decisions expressed between. This is not our failure, it's our identity. Could you say more about that?
So one of the critiques I often make about expressions of what I'll call the religious that is within all of life is that there's always a temptation to become like so airy-fairy as to be but an expression of what I refer to as the purple chiffon people. And I shared that story of, I led a retreat of young folk at this retreat house. It's a kind of a community retreat center, and it's staffed by volunteers. And so we bring the teenagers in, and the person who's hosting us, she's all dressed in this long flowing purple chiffon, is kind of moving almost ethereally around the building and floating, and welcomes us, and yada yada yada, and we hope you're here, we're so glad, and yada yada yada. So the kids, we engaged in our process, and the kids were being respectful. They were not loud screaming, they weren't fighting, they weren't cursing, they weren't, kicking furniture. They were just being 15.
Yeah.
And this person comes in like an angry wraith, just anger on her face, fangs dripping venom. And she went up one side and down the other and traumatized the hell out of all of the kids who were there.
Yeah.
And so that kind of reality is less than helpful.
Right.
Now, because I got caught up in my story, I forgot your question. So,
well, it was about the institutional church not being like, the idea that folks think that, you don't have any use for it. But you're deeply thankful for ecclesial form and the structure and the creatureliness of it.
Yeah. So that kind of ethereal quality to the church is less than helpful. The fact is that the church, because it is insisted on bodies, is insisted on meat and potatoes, or as we say, what's our central symbol at the table? It is a hunk of bread. And it's a bottle of wine.
Right.
Like two really earthy things that is at the center of who we are. I think Christianity has only made sense to the degree to which it has remained connected to the earth and has been really, really material and connected to life. But because of these people who have worked so hard, who've maintained the prayers, who've done the thought, who've done the work, Jesus' memory is kept alive. Without that, it would be gone. There would be nothing left. It would be yet a vapor that has passed us by in the night. But that doesn't mean we don't engage in a critique of what we've done. I've been involved with a couple of places that have been involved with radically rethinking their space, radically rebuilding their space, and radically opening up to the neighborhoods.
Mhm.
And not surprisingly, both these communities, in their own ways, were not large and successful. One was small and financially rather poor. The other had some investment money, but was even smaller. And yet they managed to rethink their space, rethink their building, and reconnect to the neighborhood. Now, it would be great to say that the diocese understood the dynamic that was at work. It would be great to say that the diocese was supportive of what was going on. But in the one case, which I write about in the book, It Ain't Nothing But a Mess,
Mhm.
it was the organization to which we were continually trying to have to explain ourselves.
Mhm.
That activity was not half bad because it forced us to continue to think, well, who are we? What are we about? Why are we doing this? But this notion that we had to, like, it seemed like every 6 months, write yet another report as to who we are and why we're doing what we're doing, and yada, yada, yada. It became a detriment to what we were about. And at the first opportunity in which we were trying to engage in something creative, instead of working with that in a conversational way, it was used from a canonical perspective. It was used as a way to kick the group out of the building.
Mm.
That's where my suspicion kicks in.
Yes.
I know that Kevin was telling me that you're a fan of the TV show MASH. So another connection, John, for you and I, because I love it as well. And I was going to ask you a question about one of the episodes that I think it was in season 2. There was a character in that named Captain Hildebrand, and he's a U.S. Army psychiatrist, and he has to go to the 407th MASH to kind of take a look and see how the troops are doing. And then, speaking of writing reports to the institution, writing a report to recommend if the place disbanded and the personnel maybe distributed to other units. And so, of course, he witnesses all these crazy antics and this childish behavior and dysfunction. And he delivers his report. And in short, he says that he's seen textbook examples of neuroses and psychoses, and he's seen voyeurism and fetishism and a few isms that he hadn't even heard of before. And he concurs with these impossible people are in an impossible place doing totally impossible work. They're mad, quite mad, all of them. And the only act I can think of that would be madder still would be breaking them up. And so with that picture in mind, I want to segue to something you wrote in your book, Impossible People. You write, I am continually amazed, deeply moved by people religious or not, stories of those offering their time, their labor, their gifts in situations often overwhelming, often seemingly fruitless, often stretching self-perception, responding to calls and insistence, a lure, a draw, a felt need. Stories of those ordinary, those imperfect, those living deeply within and beyond themselves, whether or not they would ever describe their efforts in religious language, those living deeply within and beyond themselves, those loving regardless, deeper than beliefs. Can you share more with us and our listeners about the ways that you've kind of witnessed the madness and folly of those who are pursued by the impossible?
Sure. I think one of the things I would always invite us to do is to drop our ecclesial blinders and look a little broader, broader still. There are impossible people in the church. Let's just be frank. And we know they're impossible people because they're often a pain in the ass. They're a pain in the ass because what they're dedicated to. They're a pain in the ass because what they insist upon. They're a pain in the ass because they keep doing the work. And without them, the church would be deeply, deeply, deeply impoverished. I think of very quickly, I shared this one narrative in the book Impossible People of Pat, who was at a parish back many years ago. Kevin knows who I mean.
Mhm.
And he was an impossible man. He was definitely a pain in the ass. His favorite line when he got frustrated was to exclaim, "That's crap." And a lot of people hated his guts. A lot of people couldn't stand him. A lot of people rejected him as not worthy of coming to church. Yet Pat was the guy I would turn to and did turn to organize various sundry things in terms of outreach ministry. Pat was the guy who went and studied. He went to seminary, not because he had a desire to become a priest. In fact, he would be apoplectic at the thought that anybody thought that's what he was doing.
Mhm.
But he went there because he wanted to learn, he wanted to understand, he wanted to follow it out. He was an impossible guy, but without him, that church would have definitely been impoverished, even though many people couldn't stand him and didn't want him working there. And I've been blessed with people throughout the years, much like that. But we also need to recognize that there are people following impossible dreams, responding to impossible calls beyond the church, responding to what I refer to, and others like John Caputo call the religious within life. The problem is that the religious is not a segment of life. So you can't take the religious and you can't lock the religious response into church. You can't lock religious response into religious systems, regardless of the system. The religious is what is operative within the totality of life. My brother rode across Canada to raise money for Boys and Girls Club. I think he would be fair to say, I don't know what he believes. I have no clue whether he believes in God or he doesn't believe in God. So I'm not even going to offer a possible response to that. But his desire to pay attention to Boys and Girls Clubs that needed someone to raise money, needed someone to voice their cause and raise their profile. And he put himself on the line and spent 3.5 months riding across the country. I want to say that's an expression of responding to an impossible call, calls of justice, or calls of generosity, or calls of hospitality, whatever they may be, that my daughter chose when she was doing teacher training, chose to work amongst the poorest school in Victoria, where there was a rampant amount of poverty, is an expression of trying to respond to what I refer to as the religious within life. I have met, there was all sorts of people who are engaged in those kinds of activities. No one in their right mind would ever say, well, that's Christian, that's churchy.
Yeah.
Nobody, because this is a group of people who not only do they not pray, they don't even want to use the name of God. Well, I'm sorry, no, they use the name of God. God damn it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But they don't, if you tried to tell them that they're practicing Christian faith, they would probably hit you with a stick.
Yeah.
Right.
But that doesn't mean there isn't something going on. And that's kind of pointing at what I talk about, like, what Bonhoeffer referred to as a kind of religionless Christianity, or a religion without religion, where you're paying attention to the work, where you're paying attention to trying to respond to impossible calls that are placed upon your heart. And you respond to them as best you can with no clue as to whether you're going to succeed or not. You just respond and respond again.
People like that are and as you say, I mean, we bear witness to them, yes, within the structures of the church, but also, as you've said, outside of it. I mean, we've had on this podcast a number of, you can think about John Davidson, who would have told you back in the day with Jesse and Jesse's journey that he wasn't particularly engaged in any church at the time, that it wasn't his desire to walk across, he wasn't fueled by some ecclesiological thought about the church or his need to be a disciple or any of those things. It was a felt need that he responded to, right? Like your brother, John, doing the thing. And it's led him into a different place. I mean, it's led him into all kinds of different relationships because of his willingness to do it. And my God, hearing you talk about Pat, I can't help but think I wouldn't be here. I mean, I literally almost had to quit in my second year, or my third year, sorry, of seminary, but for Pat. And I won't go into any more detail than that. But when Pat learned that there was the very distinct possibility of me having to walk away, he leaned in. And I won't say what he did because he'd be mortified for me to talk about it. But the fact is that when everybody else couldn't find a possible way for me to stay, Pat did. He made the impossible possible.
And so the crux of my argument is let's stop relying on how often we utilize God language. I'm not interested in God language per se. I'm not interested in whether God exists or whether you believe in God or you don't believe in God. That's irrelevant to me, which is not to say that they're unimportant conversations to have. They are important conversations to have, but those are what I refer to. Those are pub conversations that you can have when you're sitting there over a beverage.
God, I will long for those days.
And you can and you engage in all sorts of esoteric conversations. I mean, let's be frank, the drunker people get in a pub, the more esoteric.
Oh yeah.
So you got to have something to talk about in the pub, and talking about the existence of God or whether you go to church. That's the kind of questions you have there.
Yeah, it's true.
But paying attention to lures to get out of yourself, to go beyond yourself, lures to help somebody out. I'll give you a really practical, rather prosaic example. We live at the bottom of a big hill, and all of the water, not surprisingly, drains down the hill and hits the lowest point in the neighborhood, which conveniently is our front lawn.
So you have ducks.
In-ground
And
pool.
there's a big drain on the road that's supposed to drain it, except the drain was plugged. And so the water rose up. So it's like 2 feet deep, and we're trying to, and my wife and I are I still keep thinking I'm 35, but we're on the other side of 65. And I've, have an impaired left side. And so we're out there in the middle of the night trying to find the drain, and we're probing around, and I'm almost falling over. And our neighbor comes out, and brings a sump pump, and he plugs it in, and he starts diverting water further down the street so it could go around the corner, starts pumping the water away. And then he comes out with a large metal pole, and he's going down until he finds the thing. Then he's down on his hands and knees in a foot of water, using his hands to free the drain away, and does it. And so at the end of it all, we want to just say thank you. He said, no, it's just what we do.
Yeah,
it's
right.
what you do.
Right.
He went back and went to bed.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that people find out about you very quickly is that, like, you don't have a pretentious bone in your body, like over these past 2 podcasts, because you've been on one before. And I think if they listen to these podcasts, they would find that out very quickly. Now, that being said, we do know that within the church, there are a lot of people who like to focus on that pretentious, as you say, bullshit. In your book, Impossible People, you write, "My God, we love titles, awards. Truth to tell, I dislike being called father, although I do love it when my daughter says, 'Hey, popsicle,' which is adorable."
Well, she will be pleased. She says, "Oh, good, you mentioned me. Thank you."
Yeah.
Mention one daughter, you got to mention the other one. So
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
I was going to joke. No, I do have a pretentious part of my body. It's the very tip of my little.
Oh, yeah.
It's really pretentious. That's why I keep finding it.
Keep holding it.
Can you say more about these, like, fascinations with these titles and formalities and honorifics and, like, this clericism in general?
Well, if I had any real deep insight to share, I would certainly share it. I would tell you guys to record it, transcribe it, and then send it out big time.
Bottle it and sell it.
And perhaps we could advance our cause further. I'll start this way. I'll start by backing into it a bit. There was a time in my life, very, very early on, right around when I first got ordained, and it was part of my own. It was my own insecurity. So I don't know whether what I'm about to say is just a reflection of my need for continued deep psychoanalysis. But it was connected to my insecurity. And so I liked being called, for a very brief time, I liked being called father. I hated being called the reverend. I hated being called a minister. I hated being called, but call me father for a very brief time kind of gave me a warm feeling. And yet at the same time as that, there was also another part of me that wanted to try to deconstruct it almost immediately. So I get ordained priest, and the next day, my buddy and I, who was a monk for a while, went to a pub wearing our clericals. and actually, we sat there for about a half an hour before anybody would come over to serve us. You know,
They must be lost.
Now let me guess. Was this the old rideout?
It was the old rideout.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
But I guess I just don't feel the need to engage. Like I really dislike uniforms. I'm not into uniforms. And let's be frank. You know what is a clerical collar but a religious uniform? And I just don't need to. I just don't need to wear the uniform. I try my best, and I succeed sometimes, but I try my best not to offer comment about those who wear the uniform or whatever. It's not a primary thing. I would rather have someone wear clericals and yet be kind and loving and engaged with the neighborhood and so on. That's a secondary thing.
Yes.
But my God, we do. You quoted me. We do love wearing that shit. We love all the stuff. And we want to grow up. My God, if Anglicans are great at one thing, give us a task. You've got to organize a procession. Holy shit.
Let's have a parade.
We'll get everybody lined up and they'll be marching in
the right order. We'll march in.
Oh,
that's right, in the right order.
Don't
and
just
2 by 2.
Now, there's a certain sense of insecurity that comes in. I just don't like wearing the uniform because that people see the cross, either a giant cross or they see the clericals, and well, increasingly now they just think you're dressed really weirdly.
Yes.
But it's just a lure to draw out of them whatever feelings, latent or otherwise, that they have about church, good, bad, or otherwise. And it gets projected upon you, and you find yourself dealing with those projections for the first 20 minutes. And I just don't want to deal with that. I don't like clericals and I don't like titles because I'm too lazy to deal with all the projections, all the assumptions, all the crap that people have. I would much rather meet them as John. Hi, I'm John. And we get talking and you develop a friendship, and or you develop at least a conversational connection. It's been my experience that if somehow you're outed, and I use that phrase in particular, you're outed.
Yeah.
The reaction is really unfortunate. I mean, you're either treated like someone's old maiden aunt that if they happen to say shit in front of you, you're going to dry up and
you're going to crumble,
and blow away, or the conversation comes to an end.
Yes.
And I thought, what a loss of an opportunity. The rationale that I've often heard, well, it helps when you go into a hospital. If you're wearing clericals in the hospital, it helps. I haven't worn clericals in a hospital for 35 years at the very least, and I've never had a problem. They say, what are you doing here? I said, I'm a priest. I'm coming to visit so-and-so. Okay, come on in. I've never been challenged. I've never had an issue. I've never had any problem. So that seems to require wearing a special uniform is kind of redundant. Why do you need to do that? To me, it's much more interesting to be connected to the human relationships and to treat each other as person to person and individual to individual, as opposed to saying, here I am this role. Here I am this caricature. Here I am this object of free projection. Just meet me as me, and we'll go from there.
Right.
Once
I remember
heard-
when I was about to enter into seminary, I was working in a radio station at the time, and of course the announcement came out that I was leaving to go back to school, and one of the people that I'd been working with for over 10 years said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to become an Anglican priest." And she looked at me and said, I always thought you were normal. So it's like, yeah, that was the end of that, right?
and the flip side of that, Rob, one of our in another iteration of church that you and I lived in before we lived in London, a colleague at Clericus declaring how much respect he got when he walked down the hallways of the hospital in a cassock and collar. And he likes to wear a cassock and a collar to march down the hallways of the local hospital because people afford him the proper respect. Really?
Yeah.
What a load of crap.
Exactly.
To my mind, I mean, I think it's noteworthy to recognize that for century upon century upon century, clergy wore no distinctive gear at all.
Right.
That's right.
We were just dressed like everybody else was dressed.
Yeah.
And they could figure out that you were clergy, that you were a priest. I feel no need to wear distinctive dress. And in fact, I have a hunch that the reason I'm wearing distinctive dress, and it certainly was a reason why I very early wore distinctive dress, is I was so fundamentally insecure in myself. I was not comfortable being who I was, and I needed to put on airs, as they used to say. I have no patience with, we had this group of Benedictine oblates who would function in the diocese, and they would show up at all their things wearing their habits. And it used to annoy the crap out of me, like wearing their habits. I mean, it just seemed like a lot of people busy playing church. I have no interest in playing church. I have no interest in playing procession. I have no interest in playing priest, playing bishop, or playing anything else. I have a lot of interest in trying to respond to, as best I can, and I'm really limited these days, but I have a lot of interest in responding to what's going on around me, around the communities that I'm a part of. And communities have a hell of a lot of strength, a hell of a lot of resilience and resourcefulness within them if they take the risk of unlocking them and responding in whatever way makes sense in their locale. And to get caught up in saying, well, Father, and
yes, Father, no Father,
do you have a collar? Come on, give me a break.
I mean, when you get to a Zoom meeting of clerics, hey Rob, and you're doing like you've got a clericus, and you're wearing a big old collar in your living room on a screen with your colleagues. It's like, come on, guys. Whatever. Anyway, moving on.
Just one final thing, John. You note in all of your books, and this certainly has weaved its way through your lifetime of preaching, about the possibilities that present themselves when we are attuned to life on the margins. And in your book, On Edge, at the Boundaries of the Church, perhaps, you write about the Beatitudes and about Paul's teaching about the cross. I just wanted to read a little quote from that for everyone. The folly of the Beatitudes is the folly of the cross, which shames the wisdom of the wise, the folly of the cross making use of the nothings and nobodies to confound the powers, in blessing those poor, those mourning, those persecuted for righteousness' sake. This is the call of Paul, dare I say the call of Yeshua, a call I pray we take seriously, perhaps risking bringing into existence what is called for. Paul's expression of God's solidarity with the nothings and the nobodies to the exclusion of those of substance, preferring weakness to strength, is a call I pray that haunts us, haunts the church, and that spooks one and all. Can you say a little bit more as we wrap up today about this notion of God's solidarity with the nothings, in the nobodies? It's often lost in the church. We've become, I think, really perceive ourselves to be those of substance at times. But can you say more about the weakness of God?
in 25 words or less.
In 25 words or less, John.
Yeah, we're 30 seconds. Go.
Yeah, no.
We like to talk a good game, and I appreciate the talk. I really do appreciate the talk, and I appreciate at least the willingness to identify what the game is. You know, we talk about love, and we talk about faith, and we talk about hope, and we talk about compassion. I mean, and we talk about the Beatitudes. We're really good at talking about Beatitudes. Oh, hell, we'll even sing the Beatitudes. We're really good at that, and I take hope in that.
We'll cross-stitch them and put them on the wall.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. But it's much more, it's riskier. And this is where the madness, I think, comes in. If you take the chance of the risk, if you take the chance of saying, you know what, I'm gonna take this shit seriously. I can remember having a conversation with a bishop one time, who shall remain nameless. And we were yet again, I share this story in the book, but we were yet again being called to justify what we were about and so on. And so I got a print off of a poster of every single thing in the last year that we had sponsored, co-sponsored, that we had welcomed into the group. And so we went in, and the conversation was going as expected, the standard usual niceties, the standard usual comments, which was a way of talking without actually seeing anything that was going on. And I finally just said, look, Bishop, let me just show you what the hell I'm talking about. And I took the posters and I started putting the posters out, and I put them all over this big coffee table. I put them all over this long couch. I put them all over the floor in the office. They were covering everything. And I said, forget every single thing I've said. Forget even what you said. It's really simply about the work that you're doing. This is a concrete example of the work that we've been doing. It's not about whether we say God 5 times. It's not about whether we sing. It's about the damn work. Pay attention to the work. Now, was it heard? I don't know. We got kicked out shortly thereafter. But that's what it comes down to, is that right. It's about paying attention to all this. And I'm sorry, my brain is fried from my stroke, and I can't. Ask me again what you asked me, Rob.
Oh, I was just talking about those on the margins, and the notion of God in solidarity with the nothings of the world, and the weakness of God. Yeah.
And so that was actually the nature of the work. We would invite people in. We were feeding people literally off the street. And not that this was easy. I mean, a lot of these people smelled really bad. Let's be frank. I remember a guy in my office, he smelled so bad, I had to leave it for 2 hours with the windows wide open to try to air it out.
That's right.
But it's the risk. We took the risk of allowing the neighborhood to enter in, and us to go out and allow that interchange to inform what we were about and how we were going about things. To side with the nothings and the nobodies is to take on the serious work of actually engaging in acts of compassion and acts of hospitality. Another story I share one time is a parish wanted to make hospitality a feature of what they were about. And all of the material that they sent out for discussion revealed to me very clearly that they hadn't actually thought about what hospitality meant, that they didn't realize that there's an inherent risk in hospitality. And they were talking, really what they were talking about is the standard expressions of hospitality, which is more of the same to those who are the same. We invite people in who basically look like us. We don't take the risk of having someone in there who, by their very presence or by their language or by their smell or by their questions or by their needs are going to push our buttons or going to push us beyond our limits. I mean, in a sense, whatever is going on in the name of God is the name of God is actually calling us, luring us to go beyond our own limitations.
Right. Right.
And that's what at the heart of hospitality. That's the risk, one of the risks that are there. I can remember, and Kevin may remember this. I'm not saying this was a fair thing for the community, but I think I had I think it was probably my then wife got her to celebrate, and I purposefully dressed up as a street person with a cart, and I was so disguised that no one knew it was me. And I started, wandering around the outside of the building and picking up stuff, and I threw the doors open. I pushed the cart in, and I pushed the cart down the center of the church. And I could visibly see people starting to lean
Sure.
away,
Yeah.
wanting to shuffle their butt down the pew.
Yeah.
And I didn't do anything outrageous or anything. I didn't swear or anything else, but I just simply entered the space.
Right.
And it was very clear from the body language. It was very clear from comments afterwards that was as much an affront as to the decency of what was going on there, as if somebody had stood up and dropped their pants.
Mm-hmm.
And all it was having someone who visually was of the street,
Right.
visually who entered into the building, who obviously did not belong there.
Right.
The nature of hospitality is that depending on your context and depending on what's going on around you, you will take seriously persons like that. You will take seriously persons who are different in whatever way. Be they different in terms of their orientation, be they different in terms of their gender identity, be they different in terms of their income status, be they different in terms of their skin color. Mm-hmm. If you push those boundaries, you'll get a reaction. Yeah. But it's at that boundary that you move into some authenticity where, if perhaps the community is willing to engage honestly, self-critically about what might be going on, perhaps something might start to happen. Something might occur. The one church I talk about a lot in the first book was St. Mark's. It, for all of its errors in judgment, and believe me, it made some errors in judgment, but it took critically that interchange between people who were different and the community itself, recognizing that within the community, there already existed people who were different. Yes. And outside of the community, even though they looked different, were people who were very, very faithful people. And they took the risk of living in between all of that stuff and right. trying to do the work of response in the middle of it all.
Right. Well, they're great stories, and we certainly want to encourage our folks listening today to find out more about them and more about John's thoughts on these things in his books. Ain't Nothing But a Mess. There's Kevin's holding them up. Impossible People and On the Edge, and there they are. Very good. So we'll look forward to those. And hey, John, thanks for coming by for a second time. We hope there's a third time on the Vicar's Crossing. We appreciate your time.
I'm still trying to write and so on, and who knows, you may get me on at some other point. So thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity.
Hey, it was great having you.
All right. And again, thanks to John for giving us the time and coming back to the Vicar's Crossing. We hope to see him again real soon.
Yeah, pick up his books.
Here's one. Check out his books.
Oh, here's another one. Ain't Nothing But a Mess, Impossible People, and On Edge.
Yeah. Hey, congratulations, Ian, to wrapping up school this year. We're proud of you.
Hey, way to go, Ian.
Sticking with it for those 2 years. We hope you have some sort of commencement or graduation. I know that's been lost in all this madness of COVID and pandemics, but we hope you get that opportunity because you deserve it. And, we're proud of you, man. We know how hard you work. So good for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Guys, until we get together again, thanks for spending the time. It's good to be together. And we want to say thank you to our sponsors, as always, to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated. And to Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, locally owned, locally operated, locally loved. Congratulations to Carol.
Yes, very soon.
And to Molly Maid, make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. All right. Good,
I
guys.
think it's good.
I think we're good. It's
Yeah.
a wrap.
Do you want to do our line, or you don't want to do our line?
Well, we're going to do our line. We're always
Okay,
going to
let's
do a
do
line.
the line.
We
We gotta
always
do
do a
our-
line before
let's
we
do a
leave
line
each
together.
other. Let's see what comes.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time. And remember, Kevin, to always look both ways.
Before you cross the street. That's the way Rob and I do a line.
Thank you for listening. Our hosts are Kevin George and Rob Henderson. Our producer and composer is myself, Ian, with original artwork done by Elizabeth Dodman. If you have any questions or want to know where to find us, tweet us at Vicar's Crossing or find us on Facebook at The Vicar's Crossing. If you have any other questions about anything heard on this podcast, leave us a comment or look in the description to find out more. Thanks!